What's up guys, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports, and today we're going to be doing an install on a spacer leveling kit for the front of our 2019 Ranger. Now this will be kind of a general video, so no matter what spacer kit you have, you'll follow basically the same steps to get it installed, and it doesn't really matter if it's a 1-inch or a 2-inch or what brand it is, it'll be pretty close to the same. Now with that being said, the kit I have on the bench is a BDS system, and this is a 2-inch level. So it's a little different from some of the other ones on the market right now because it actually comes with a little top mount spacer, the 3 new nuts for the top mount, a spring seat spacer for the bottom, which makes it kind of unique, and then some rear shocks for the back. Now, we're not going to worry about the rear shock in this video, we're going to focus just on the spacer, but with all that being said, we're going to get the truck up on the lift, pull that wheel off, and jump straight into it. So once you've got your vehicle up in the air and you've got the wheel off of it, we're going to start by removing these 2 brackets on either side of the knuckle. This one we'll use a 10mm for the brake line, and then we're going to use an 8mm for this little sensor line. Now that we've got the brackets removed, we're going to go ahead and remove the tie rod end down here, and that's going to be a 15mm bolt on the end of that. There we go. And since this is an aluminum knuckle, these tend to pull out pretty easy, but if yours is bound up, you'll just need to give it a hit or two with the hammer there and then tap it through, and you should be good to clear that out of the way. Now with the tie rod end moved out of the way, we actually do want to clear a little bit more space with this line. And what you're going to want to do is take some sort of pry tool, come up here, and get these little plastic clips out of that upper control arm. There we go. With those clear, we can kind of snake this around the outside of the tie rod end just to keep it out of the way for now, make sure it doesn't get tangled up in anything. Now for the sway bar, we're going to come down here to this first bushing and remove the 2 18mm bolts on either end to loosen this up. So with the sway bar loosened up down here by the bushing, we'll come back up to the top of the knuckle where it meets the upper control arm, and we're going to want to remove this bolt. And once you pull it off, the upper control arm should pop out the top, but once again, if it is a little bound up, you may have to hit it with a hammer a few times on the end of the knuckle just to loosen everything up so it'll break free. So once we've got the upper control arm separated from the knuckle, we'll rest to the side like you just saw me do, and now we have full access to our strut. So we're going to need to remove these 2 18mm nuts on the bottom first. True. Now with the 2 lower nuts removed, we're going to remove the 3 nuts on the top of the strut. So now that we've got all three of the 15mm nuts removed from the top mount and we've got the two 18s off the bottom, we're gonna go ahead and put a little pressure on this, and you can see it moves the whole strut down. So if we give this pressure and pull it back, we can start to work the strut out towards us. And we'll just lift up from the bottom. So there we go, we've got our factory strut. So now, depending what leveling kit you have, you should have some sort of spacer for the top mount. And with our BDS kit, we're gonna have one for the top and one for the bottom as well. But those of you that have just a top mount spacer, you're gonna drop that over the studs, and then we'll go ahead and pop this right back in and start doing the reinstall. All right, guys, so we got our strut taken apart, put it back together, and we put that little spacer down here in the bottom for the spring seat. And then obviously I have the new top mount spacer sitting on here as well. And it basically can only line up one way, so you don't have to worry about angling it or putting it on wrong. Now that we've done that, we're gonna just go ahead and slot this into place. So I've started by just loosely attaching the new nuts to the top mount here to get this sort of hanging downward. And then that's gonna give us the ability to push on this lower control arm, and we can seat the studs through the bottom, and then we'll attach those 18mm bolts that we took off earlier. All right, so now with the top kind of loosely tightened in, we've got the studs through the bottom, and we're gonna go ahead and take those 18mm nuts and tighten them up. Now, as you go to tighten both the top and the bottom down, you're gonna wanna go ahead and check the manufacturer specs on what torque you need to set that to. So you can hit it with a ratchet first, that's what we're gonna do, and then we'll come back with the torque wrench and get it to BDS's specs for this system. But once again, check your instructions just to be sure you do the right numbers for your kit. So now that we've torqued everything down the way it needs to be with the strut, we're gonna go ahead and move the knuckle back up into place. And for this part, you're gonna probably need an extra set of hands to bring this upper control arm down. So we want the stud to come back through the knuckle, and then we can tighten on that little nut to hold everything together. So once you get to a certain point of tightening this nut up, you'll realize that it's starting to actually spin the stud with the joint as well, and it won't go any further. So what you'll need to do then is get this 18mm wrench around the nut, and then you're gonna take a smaller 8mm socket, and you could use a wrench for this as well, but we're gonna use a socket there, and just support the stud, so while you twist the nut, it actually tightens everything up without spinning the entire joint. Next, before we go ahead and attach our tie rod back to the knuckle, we're gonna go ahead and reattach the sway bar back here, and we're just doing that beforehand, so if we need a little bit of play or we need to wiggle the sway bar slightly, we still can, but let's go ahead and tighten this back up. Now let's carefully unwrap our sensor wire here so it's not caught up in the tie rod itself. And then we're going to bring the tie rod back around underneath the knuckle. Now, same as with this upper control arm, you'll notice that you'll only be able to tighten this to a certain point before it starts spinning the stud. So now you'll need a little 7mm socket or a wrench to grab the end, and then a 15mm wrench to go ahead and tighten the actual nut itself down. With the tie rod all tightened into place now, we can go ahead and attach the brake line bracket and the bracket for the wiring here on the sides of the knuckle. We'll tighten those down, and then we can also reattach these plastic clips at the top. But you will notice that sometimes these clips do break when you pull them out, and they don't fit extremely tightly once you try to push them back in. So you can also use zip ties to get that tightened back on there. That way it's not flopping around or getting caught in your suspension. So guys, that's going to be a wrap on doing a leveling spacer install on your 2019 Ranger. From here, you'll obviously want to put your wheel back on, get all your lug nuts torqued down, and then you will want to make sure that you go ahead and take your truck to a shop to have it professionally aligned, because anytime you mess with suspension components, it's going to take things out of alignment and it's going to be tweaked, obviously, just from having a different setup with a spacer in there. So make sure you get that dialed in so you don't wear your tires funny and have issues driving. But other than that, it's going to be a wrap. And so as usual, guys, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.